Hello, this is Dr. Basil Constantine from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we're going to be talking about how to reflect on a visual artifact. Now, a visual artifact is basically anything that you can look at, anything that creates a visual impression on your mind. This can be the layout of a book, it can be a sculpture, it could be a building, and in this particular case, we're going to be talking about paintings, but whichever visual medium we're looking at, the process will be the same. So today we're going to be looking specifically at an example drawn from the BIBO 101 course, where the week 2 assignment 1 asks you to reflect on different depictions of Jesus, which are incredibly varied, as we'll see soon. And often students look at this assignment and say, gosh, where do I begin? I'm trying to write objectively about it, and we need to keep in mind that this is a reflection. We're looking at your personal thoughts and observations. You want to have these in a structured and logical fashion so that they are clear and understandable to others. But you're being asked ultimately to talk about your thoughts, to reflect on what those mean, what you'll do with them, how you might explain them to other people, and other things like that. And that's very doable in APA style. So let's take a look at this assignment. Now, this is coming from week 2 of BIBO 101, which is the Jesus, His Life, and Teachings course. Now, for a class that is focused on the personage of Jesus, it is very relevant to look at the way that other people have reflected on that and tried to capture that in visual art, because visual art is a huge part of how we organize our impressions, whether it's through the medium of film, painting, statues, and other things. So this begins with a rather substantial preamble, starting off with saying that the purpose of this assignment is to select an image of Jesus and reflect on why that image is meaningful to them. It's not saying that one is correct. It's saying pick one and tell us why that or how that is meaningful to you, and to make that clear through your words and argumentation. And by argumentation, I don't mean saying, oh, this should be the most important one for everyone, but to make it clear through specific examples and elaboration how and why that image you selected is meaningful to you. And you can have more than one image that is meaningful to you. This is not a one size fits all kind of thing, but for the purpose of the assignment, you need to pick one. And the space really is appropriate for discussing one at length. So continuing through the preamble part, we have this overview where they give you some background about the New Testament, the structure and patterns in the four Gospels, or the four canonical Gospels, because we have discovered at least parts of other Gospels that did not enter into the mainstream circulation of the Christian church and were not recognized by church councils as being the Gospels giving great insight into Christianity and the story of Jesus. But we see that the reading for this week compares the Gospels to portraits, which is metaphorically a really strong way of saying, hey, one of the purposes of these stories, these chronicles, is to give the people hearing them an impression of who Jesus was and what he did. And the pictures that they had in their own mind's eye are not entirely different from the pictures that different artists may have had in their mind's eye as they set to capturing Jesus in casting, in painting, and other ways. And there's a note here that you'll be prompted to think about what each author seems to particularly emphasize, which is something you might do in your own reflection to say, hey, here's this thing that they're emphasizing, and here's what that means or doesn't mean to me. And then looking at that last one, it's a note that there's some ways that the Bible is taught and some way that is read that emphasizes literalism as opposed to symbolism. A little note about the Synoptic Gospels. And hold on, let me fix that layout there. Just a moment. There we go. So we have a selection here of 9 different depictions of Jesus. If we were to rotate through these, we have the upper left that appears to be a movie or a photography shoot still, where we have a relatively classic depiction of Jesus as Caucasian with some darker skin, a full beard and mustache, and longer hair, wearing a white robe. Now, there are many variations on this, but it's capturing some of the most common and iterations here. Now, if we look to 6 o'clock on the image, we find a bald Jesus with no facial hair, except for the eyebrows and eyelashes, as no beard, no goatee, no hair on top. That is in many ways opposite of the one in the upper left. Now, we still have the skin that is a little bit on the darker side, so it's not entirely distant. And we have his making the classic uh, gesture that many depictions of Jesus and saints do. So we have some familiar elements, some less familiar elements to people coming from Western perspective. Then we have a Last Supper at roughly 12 o'clock. We have a more multiracial uh, cast of Jesus and the apostles. Then we have a dark-skinned Jesus with some Native American iconography. And then in the right, we have a more pale-skinned Jesus. Lower right, we have Jesus with a more of a goatee and dreadlocks. Then we have I think many people would say a more Middle Eastern appearing in Jesus around 5 o'clock. Around 7 o'clock, we have a more Northern European, still has the long hair, still has the beard, still has the mustache, but we see blue eyes and much fairer hair. Then in the lower left, we have a Jesus who looks very Eastern Asian. I would say, looking at that to me, my eyes, that looks like more of a uh, Chinese depiction, but uh, because of uh, history of colonization and intermarriage, whether that's a Chinese depiction, whether it's a Japanese depiction, whether it's a Korean one influenced by the Chinese tradition, we could date the garments, but garments are not universal. Even when you have something like, in this case, the particular robe you'll find in different periods in Japan, Korea, and China. And so the migration of those fashions means that we can't just lock it into one exact place and time. Now, probably the use of chopsticks is going to make us think, okay, this is a little bit more Japanese, but that's not a universal thing. So we are looking at some things that capture different aspects of tradition. And one of the things that we want to know, looking at the assignment instructions, we've got 3 bullets here. So after you've selected your image from the collage, you're going to answer the questions: how does the image you selected make you feel? Which image are you drawn to and why? And what does the selected image imply about Jesus? And this is about your thoughts and feelings. So let's talk about how you would elaborate on them. Firstly, by how you will be graded on that. So things you want to make sure that you are doing. So if we look at the criteria, it's basically, did you answer each question directly and in sufficient detail? And is the overall assignment within that 300 to 350 word length? So it's very specific about the length. Being off the length can be the difference between an A and a B. And that's going to be a bit over a page. So roughly speaking, 1 page of text in APA style using our template. So 12-point font, double spaced, 1-inch margins. That's going to be about 250 words per page. So this is somewhere around a page and a third or so of text. but make sure you do the word count because that is what you are being graded on. Now, let's now talk about how to describe personal reactions and feelings in APA style, because this is something where different versions of APA style over the years have either allowed or not allowed the use of first-person perspective. And I will tell you flat out that APA 7, the current edition, does allow the use of first-person perspective and specifically encourages it when this clarifies who did or felt what. So when you're describing your personal thoughts, reactions, and actions, it is absolutely appropriate in APA style to use statements that start with I or include my. So I believe that, I selected this, my first reaction. Those are all the kinds of phrasings that you are allowed to and encouraged to use when you're talking about your things. Now, what APA 7th edition discourages with first person is the overuse of first person statements when it's not relevant and not helpful. So if you are describing things that you did, often it's helpful to clarify in the first sentence, oh, I did X. But then when you're describing the series of events, does every statement need to start with I? Usually not. So, just ask the question, are you clarifying or are you placing the focus on yourself when it's not needed or helpful? So some guiding thoughts here. First, be specific about what you're describing. For example, my first reaction to the photo of the poster of Jesus as an African with dreadlocks, that's very specific. There is only one image that meets that description. Or prior to this assignment, I had never seen a very East Asian appearing Jesus before. Again, there is only one image that fits the description. Now, if you were to say my reaction to the depiction of Jesus with a beard, that is not very descriptive. That's going to include, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, possibly 7 and images. So that is not precise. That does not really help the reader know which one you're talking about. And so you can use directions, you can use descriptive details that are unique to an image, or they're specific enough to reasonably be able to identify it. So for example, if you said the image of Jesus with geometric patterns in the background that recall Native American art, well, there's only one image that we see here that fits that description. Now, you also want to not just state your thoughts, but elaborate here. Now, I'm in Cusco, Peru at the moment, and so I've included an image from the Cusco Cathedral, where they have a Last Supper that depicts a few things that you don't find in your stereotypical depictions. Now, the vast majority of the population here is Quechua by descent, and so we have darker skin and then we see in this depiction. But let's take a look at some of the elements that are very specific and unique to this culture. So after further reflection, I decided that I really like the anonymous Last Supper painting in the Cusco Cathedral. Elements of local culture like the corn, you can see ears of corn just to the upper right of the main dish, like elements of local culture like the corn and baked guinea pig, that's what you see front and center, showed how the concepts were made more universal, which I think, and then list whatever your thoughts are. Now, if we're to look at the drinking vessels and the various fruits and dried vegetables that are on the table, and things like the circular bread that's being chopped in half, and so Jesus is holding one half and the other's on the table, you'll actually find these are all things that if you were walking through Cusco today, you would actually see all of those objects. It's a very hyper-local adaptation, which I think is pretty cool. And those elements are hyper-local, even if the features, the dress, the complexions of Jesus and the apostle are not. Now, you might have an opposite direction. You might find that highly distracting, in which case, tell us about that, because this is about your thoughts and feelings and how this shapes your impression. Now, one of the reasons I would guess that this artist added these, besides them being very familiar local elements, is that it is a way of getting at the universality of the story. And there is a very powerful element of the familiar there. Now, that may work for you, may not. Tourists often remark on this because if they haven't eaten guinea pig, or cuy, as they call it locally, if they don't consider this a familiar thing, it may be alienating because that is not something that they see as their tradition or their conception or their world experience. But tell us about it. And I want to emphasize that discordance can be part of your reaction, and that we have our preferences for many reasons, and that is something worthy of talking about. Because what someone does to try and be universal or to convey an idea to one audience may not work for someone else. Like this image here. While I understand that the painting is an artistic depiction of Jesus, implying that he was fully man and fully divine from birth, Matthew 20:16, I find the extreme muscle tone to be very distracting, and I do not personally like it. So that's very specific. It's identifying what you think the intent is in the image, grounding that with a citation. It's describing the element that you're discussing, the extreme muscle tone. You could even say the extreme muscle tone, such as the uh, abdominal definition on the baby Jesus. And, there are all sorts of ways where theologians, church historians, artists, and more have grappled with what it means to have this concept of Jesus being fully man and fully divine and what that would mean for a baby. And, that's a difficult concept to grasp, having the baby Jesus having the kind of body that a Olympic bodybuilder would be proud of. Uh, you know, that's a particular choice. I wouldn't say it works for me personally, but I can understand what they're trying to get at, and that's the kind of thing where you find something that is not resonant with you, and I'd say, well, lean into that, write about it. Remember, we only have a little bit over a page, maybe a page and a third to write about. And so if you're discussing your thoughts and grounding and following through the different implications, you're going to be able to fill up that space pretty quickly. But make sure that you are grounding it in APA style. You're clarifying that these are your personal reactions and feelings. You have the option of grounding it in the literature, but refer to specific visual elements. And so don't just say, oh, this painting made me feel this way. Talk about the specifics that made you feel a particular way. And if we look at this, these are all images that you will find used around the world for different reasons. It might be helpful to tell a little bit about who you are and what your experience had been and how those shape your perception, why this resonates or doesn't resonate with you. If I were writing this myself, I don't feel like I have a good idea. If I was teleported back to 30 years is AD, and I was trying to pick Jesus out of the crowd at a marketplace. I don't think going in, I could say I had a good idea of what the exact skin tone, facial hair, or length of hair. I don't know what the fashions were back then. I don't know um, how much sun exposure, tree cover, things like that might influence the amount of tan, and the variety of skin tones that you'd find in contemporary Jews and other residents in the Middle East is actually highly variable, even within a community. So I personally don't know. But yeah, there are probably some images that through your previous experience, when you think about this, if you were asked to paint a picture, so to speak, in your mind's eye, you'll have some impressions, and how those do or don't relate to one of these images is a great thing to talk about. So we've discussed how to interpret this assignment's instructions. We've discussed how to describe your personal reactions and feelings in APA style. And if after you've written up your assignment draft, if you want additional input, if you want some insight and comments from the Online Writing Center, you can go to my.acu.edu under Academic Resources, select Online Writing Center, and just follow the instructions to make an appointment. You can make up to 2 appointments per week. You can have an email appointment where you upload your draft, and then within 24 hours of your appointment time, we send you feedback. Or you can sign up for a Zoom appointment in real time and be able to pose questions back and forth. Either is fine. We have a team that is available for both things. And with that, I'll just say, if you have any additional questions, feel free to send us an email at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu, and have a good night.